There's something out there beneath the trees, beyond the campfire's glow, that doesn't just watch. It learns. It remembers. And sometimes it follows. Tonight we enter 6 stories of people who vanished into the wild or came back changed. A hiker whose own voice echoed from the dark. A logger who found his name carved into the forest. A child who dreamed of dolls before they showed up on the porch. These aren't just wilderness horror stories. They're warnings from the edge of the map, where nature ends and something else begins. This is High Scary Stories. Let's begin. Story 1. The Silent Ones Behind the Pines. When my grandfather passed away, he left me something that changed the course of my life. A remote cabin deep in the Colorado foothills, right on the edge of Pike National Forest. The structure wasn't much to look at, stone chimney wood slat porch and pine wood shutters that groaned in the wind. But it was real, and it was ours. My wife and I were both burned out from city life, me from IT contracting, her from the chaos of public school teaching. So we took it as a sign. We packed what we needed, sold the rest, and left Denver behind. The cabin sat at the end of a winding gravel road, with no neighbors for nearly a mile in either direction. At first, that silence was everything we hoped for. No sirens, no streetlights, no people. Just the occasional wind slipping between the evergreens, or the call of some distant animal breaking through the dusk. We set up a modest solar array, kept a generator for backup, and lived with just enough technology to feel modern without being overwhelmed by it. The woods around us were vast, real wilderness, not the curated kind you see on state park brochures. These trees had seen generations pass. You could feel it in the air, dense and heavy, like you were always being watched, but never quite unwelcome. My wife loved it at first, said it felt like living inside a postcard. We chopped wood together, made meals by lantern light, and fell asleep most nights to the sound of coyotes echoing off the ridges. But something changed once the snow came. It was subtle, barely more than a whisper beneath the wind. A sense of being observed. Sometimes I'd catch my dog staring into the tree-lined tail, low, ears rigid. One night, he refused to leave the porch even when I called. I chalked it up to deer or foxes. But the silence had shifted. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was expectant, like the woods themselves were waiting for something or someone. I didn't know it then, but our quiet life was about to fracture in a way I couldn't have imagined. The first snowfall came in late November, blanketing the cabin and the pines in silence so complete it felt sacred. I woke up early that morning, as I always did, to start the generator and split a few logs before coffee. The sky was gray, the kind of dull that makes the forest feel endless. But what stopped me cold was what I saw beside my truck. Footprints. Not animal prints, not boot tracks. Human footprints. Barefoot. Narrow, long, too clean to be random. They came out of the forest straight from the tree line and stopped precisely at the driver's side door. Then they turned around and disappeared back into the woods. No detours, no circles, no hesitation. Just a straight approach and retreat, like someone had walked right up to the truck, stared inside, then vanished. I called my wife out to see. She stood there in her coat mouth, half-open arms wrapped tight against the cold. "Maybe a lost hiker," she said weakly. But we both knew that didn't make sense. No sane person would be walking barefoot in sub-zero temperatures in the middle of nowhere, and certainly not that quietly. There were no other prints, no approach trail, just that single pattern leading in and out of the trees like a whisper. I brushed it off as a fluke, told myself maybe it was some local kid messing around, though there weren't any neighbors with kids that I knew of. But the next morning, the same prints were back. This time, they didn't go to the truck. They circled the cabin, not close enough to touch the walls, but just far enough away to suggest caution or observation. That's when I realized something was off. I installed one of my old trail cameras on the pine across from the porch. It was an old motion sensor cam from a camping trip years back. I figured if someone or something was coming near, I'd get a photo. But after 3 nights, the SD card was empty. Not corrupted, just blank. Like the camera hadn't even turned on until the 4th night. That morning, the camera had a single image, a blurry, overexposed shot of the tree line. But just behind one of the trunks, half shadowed by a branch, there was a face distorted grayish with hollow sockets where eyes should be. I stared at it for nearly an hour. My wife told me it must be a trick of the light, but deep down I knew. Something was out there, and it wasn't just watching, it was learning. I sent the photo from the trail cam to a friend of mine named Caleb. He used to work with search and rescue in Denver before moving into wildfire patrol. He was no stranger to strange things in the woods, people who wandered off, things people left behind, and things they weren't supposed to find. I didn't tell him what I thought it was. I just asked him to come stay a few nights and take a look. Caleb showed up the next afternoon with a heavy duffel and a serious face. He didn't crack the usual jokes or rib me about my mountain man lifestyle. He looked at the photo for a long while, then at me. "You sure you didn't mess with this image?" he asked, not accusingly, more like he wanted to believe something simpler. I told him no. I told him the card had been empty the first 3 nights, and then suddenly just this one frame, one moment captured like it meant to be found. We waited until nightfall. He brought his thermal monocular, a military-grade unit he used in wildfire surveillance, top of the line. The generator was off. The lights were out. We sat bundled in silence on the porch, the rifle resting across my lap like some half-forgotten relic of a world that still made sense. Around 2 a.m., Caleb froze. "Movement," he whispered. I tensed. He handed me the monocular. At first, I saw nothing but the usual heat, outlines, trees, brush, faint echoes of rabbits, maybe. Then I saw it. 3 heat signatures, low to the ground, moving slowly, almost rhythmically. Crawling, not like animals, like people, but twisted, crooked. Their limbs moved, wrong elbows, bending 2 wide knees, dragging like they were disjointed. They moved together, deliberately circling the outer edge of the clearing. Caleb mouthed a curse. "They're flanking us," he said. "Back inside, now." We moved fast, locking the doors and covering the windows. I killed the lights. We sat in darkness, weapons ready, barely breathing. But they never came closer, never tried to get in. Instead, they remained in the tree line for nearly an hour, barely visible except when one of them would briefly stand too tall, too thin, and then crouch back down again like some kind of grotesque sentry. Just before dawn, they were gone. Caleb didn't sleep. Neither did I. When we went out in the morning, we found something we hadn't expected. One of the old pines just beyond the edge of our yard had something lodged into the bark. Caleb pulled it out with gloved hands. It was a human tooth, yellowed, flat, no root, too large to be a child's, too clean to have come from an animal. We both stared at it, and neither of us spoke. That day, Caleb left. He didn't say much. Just hugged me, told me to get motion lights, and said, "If it comes back, don't follow it. Don't speak to it. Just don't." Whatever was out there, it wasn't human. And somehow I had the sick feeling it had always known we were watching it too. For a while after Caleb left, things went still again. The snow came heavier that January, and we busied ourselves with survival, splitting wood, clearing the roof, keeping the water lines from freezing. I told myself whatever we saw that night had been some bizarre forest anomaly, ferals, pranksters, even hallucinations. I wanted to believe that. So did my wife. But the woods weren't done with us. It started on a night in early February. The wind howled so violently, it sounded like voices, like people screaming from far away. Around midnight, the power cut out. That wasn't new, the generator would sometimes freeze, but something about the silence felt different. I got up to check the lines, grabbing my flashlight and pulling on boots. That's when I heard her scream from the bedroom. I bolted back inside. My wife was sitting up in bed, pale as the snow outside, pointing at the window across from her. I saw something, she whispered, in the glass, behind me. I checked the porch. Nothing. But when I stepped outside, I saw them again. Footprints, hundreds of them. Perfect ovals of bare human feet swirling around the house like a cyclone. Not random patterned. Loops, circles, intersecting lines that looked almost mathematical. But none of them came from or led to the woods. They just started and ended there, like the prints had appeared out of thin air. As I stood frozen on the porch, my flashlight flickered, and that's when I saw it. Carved into the snow on the steps, scrawled with something dark and sticky, were the words, "We're still here." I called the police again. They sent a local deputy who arrived an hour later, looking half asleep and unconvinced. But when he stepped onto the porch, his face changed. He didn't say much, just asked if there had been any break-ins. I shook my head. He looked at the snow patterns again and muttered, "We've seen something like this once, years ago." I pressed him, but he deflected, gave me a card, and left before finishing his coffee. Later that week, I drove into town to dig through county records. I had to know. Had anyone ever reported anything like this? That's when I found it. A handwritten report from 1982. A man my grandfather had filed a missing persons notice for his own younger brother, last seen walking toward the woods behind the cabin. The case was never solved. No body, no prints. Just a note left in the snow. The deputy who had responded back then, same last name as the one who visited me. The deeper I dug, the more I realized my grandfather had never just gone quiet in his last years like the family said. He'd been watching, recording, waiting. The notebook I found in a sealed toolbox in the attic was filled with sketches, creatures with jointless limbs, hollow eyes, rows of teeth like fish bones. He'd called them the Silent Ones. And in the final entry he wrote, "They don't leave. They learn." Story 2. The Man in the Campsite. After the divorce, I didn't want therapy. I didn't want advice. I just wanted quiet. So I packed my gear, drove north, and decided to spend a week alone in the boundary waters deep in northern Minnesota, where the snow falls thick and the world stops caring about your problems. The air up there was clean, untouched. Frozen lakes, towering pines, no cell signal for miles. It was exactly what I needed. I'd done solo trips before, but this one felt different. Not just because of the heartbreak, but because I was determined to prove something to myself, that I wasn't broken, that I could still navigate camp, survive, and most importantly, be alone without falling apart. I picked a route off the marked trails, one that looped around an isolated frozen lake, surrounded by nothing but wilderness. The first 2 nights were peaceful. I set up camp just beyond the tree line, each time avoiding high ground to stay out of the wind. I cooked by fire, kept to myself, and didn't dwell too long on the memories waiting to bite at the edges of my mind. The cold made everything feel sharper, cleaner. But by the 3rd night, something changed. It started with a sound. I was inside my tent, half asleep, when I heard a soft, rhythmic tapping like knuckles against wood. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up thinking maybe a branch was bouncing in the wind against a nearby tree. But the air outside was still. Dead still. I poked my head out. Nothing but snow and dark trees. The next morning I shrugged it off. Maybe ice cracking in the distance. Maybe just my nerves. But as I packed up my gear, I noticed something odd. A line of pine cones arranged in a perfect arc right outside my tent flap. I hadn't noticed them the night before. And they hadn't fallen naturally. They were laid out with intention spaced evenly, each one pointing toward the lake. I stared at them for a long time. Then I laughed, told myself it was coincidence. Maybe an animal, maybe the wind. But deep down I felt it. The woods weren't empty, and I wasn't alone. The fourth morning started with something missing my compass. I always kept it in the same place, tucked inside the side pouch of my pack, clipped for easy access. I checked it before bed, but now it was gone. I searched every pocket, every flap of my tent, every snow-covered inch of the camp. Nothing. What made it worse was that nothing else was touched. My food, my stove, even my cash were all still there. Just the compass gone. Like someone had reached in with purpose. I told myself I was slipping, that I'd misplaced it, maybe left it on a rock or in my coat. But by noon, I knew that wasn't the case. And that same quiet dread from the night before crept back into my gut. When I returned to camp later that day, after a short hike to scout the shoreline, I found the compass. It was placed neatly on a flat stone beside my tent. But it wasn't alone. It sat in the center of a spiral made from pine needles, perfectly arranged, concentric, exact. There was no way wind or animals had done it. That night, I barely slept. I lay in my sleeping bag, ears straining every creak and groan outside, magnified in my head. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the tent, snow crunching beneath something heavy. One loop, then two, then silence. I clenched my flashlight but didn't open the flap. I couldn't. I just lay there, frozen, heart thudding so hard I thought it might give me away. After maybe 30 minutes, I sat up, worked up the courage to unzip the tent just enough to peek. There were no footprints. The snow was perfectly smooth. I stepped outside anyway, boots crunching the silence flashlight, sweeping over trees. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A boot print inside my tent. It was faint but unmistakable, pressed into the nylon floor just inches from where my head had rested. The next morning, I went to boil snow for water. As I turned the pot over, something fell out my knife. The one I always kept by my side at night, tucked into my sleeping bag. Now it was in the pot, resting clean against cold metal. And then, as I sat beside the fire, trying to make sense of anything, I heard it, my voice. A perfect echo of something I had said the night before. I think I'm losing it. It came from the woods. Same cadence, same pitch. But I hadn't said a word since sunrise. That voice, my voice echoing from the woods, shattered whatever illusion I had left that this was all in my head. I didn't chase it. I didn't even move. I just sat there paralyzed, watching the tree line, waiting for something to step out. But nothing did. The forest just swallowed the sound like it hadn't happened at all. I stayed close to camp that day, too afraid to hike. Every sound made me flinch. At one point, a low rustle in the trees made me spin around so fast I dropped my canteen. Nothing was there, or at least nothing I could see. But I felt it. Something was tracking me, learning me. It wasn't just watching anymore. It was playing. I late afternoon, clouds rolled in fast and hard, and within an hour the snowfall was thick enough to blur everything beyond 10 feet. I scrambled to secure the tent, gather my gear, and cover the fire pit. That's when I saw him. He was standing across the lake, barely visible through the haze. A figure hunched low back, turned, holding something to his ear. I raised my hand to shout, but the moment I moved, he mimicked me, same motion, same speed. I froze. So did he. Slowly, I dropped my hand. His dropped too. It was like watching a reflection in water, but distorted just slightly, out of sync. I backed toward the trees, toward my camp, and then he moved, not toward me. He skipped, like a child playing hopscotch. 2 short bounds to the left arms, flailing loosely, then a long, exaggerated lunge into the trees. I heard no sound from his feet, no break in the snow. Just movement glitchy wrong. I hid inside my tent for hours that night, rifle across my lap, every zipper double-checked. The snowfall muffled everything. My own breathing sounded too loud. I didn't dare sleep. Around midnight, I heard a new sound, a low hum like someone was whispering just outside the canvas. Not words, just presence. I held my breath. The humming stopped. Then slowly something slid under the tent flap, a mirror. A small, cracked hand mirror. My name was written on the glass in black marker. My full name. Not the name I gave on trail permits. Not the one I use online. My birth name. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just stared at it until the sun began to rise. When I finally stepped outside, the lake was untouched. My fire pit was still covered. But the pine cone spiral had returned larger this time, encircling the entire tent. And at its center, where the mirror had been, was a cassette tape. No label, no case. Just a black cassette. And when I played it back later on an old recorder at home, it was my voice again. Only this time I was saying things I hadn't said yet. I left the tape on a stump and didn't touch it again. Something about hearing my future voice predicting things I hadn't even thought yet unraveled me in a way nothing else had. My hands were trembling as I packed. Logic told me to stay calm, wait for daylight, but instinct told me to run. I knew that whatever was out there, it didn't just want to watch me. It wanted to rewrite me, replace me, erase me. I planned to hike out before sunset. I knew I could cover the miles faster if I pushed even in snow. But the forest had other plans. Around noon, the wind picked up, and with it came another storm. Visibility dropped fast, and the trail markers disappeared beneath the snow. I doubled back toward camp, trying not to panic. But when I returned, the tent was gone. Not collapsed, not buried, gone. Everything, my stove, my sleeping bag, even my boot prints vanished like the forest had digested them. I turned in circles, scanning the white silence, trying to find any trace. That's when I heard the footsteps again. Not fast, not sneaky, just steady, confident. I turned toward the sound heart-pounding rifle raised, and there he was, standing between 2 trees about 30 feet away. Same man from across the lake, if you could call him that. Same hunched posture, same twitching limbs. But now I could see his face, or what was left of it. The skin looked like it had been peeled, rearranged, as if someone had tried to draw a face from memory. The eyes were too far apart. The mouth was too wide. And in one hand, he held something familiar, my other boot. Took a step forward. I shouted at him to stop. He kept coming. I fired a warning shot into the snow at his feet. The crack echoed like thunder. He flinched, but didn't run. He just tilted his head like a curious animal, then slowly bent down and placed the boot on the ground, exactly where the bullet had landed. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back into the trees. I didn't follow. I didn't pack. I didn't care. I sprinted. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs cramped, and the snow blurred into streaks. By some miracle, I found a ranger's cabin near the edge of the park. I didn't explain much. Just enough to get a ride out. That was 8 months ago. I still have the mirror. I still have the cassette. But I've never played it again. And I've never gone back. Because some part of me still hears it, that voice in the woods, whispering things I haven't said yet. Story 3. They were waiting in the ravine. I was 19 when I joined my first logging crew. Fresh out of high school, no interest in college, and desperate to get out of my dead-end hometown in eastern Tennessee. A neighbor got me the job, seasonal work deep in the Appalachian Mountains, clearing timber for a private landowner near the Tennessee-North Carolina border. It paid well enough, and I liked the idea of hard labor being off the grid, no distractions. The team was a mix of older guys lifers who'd been working the mountains for decades, and a few other rookies like me. They gave me the nickname Flatfoot the first day, because I showed up in brand new steel toes that hadn't seen mud yet. We'd laugh, eat, work ourselves bloody, and crash in a row of beat-up campers at the base of the ridge. The site itself was unlike anything I'd ever seen. A steep, narrow ravine tucked so deep in the forest, it took the crew 2 weeks just to clear a road wide enough for the trucks and equipment. It was beautiful in that eerie, untouched way. Thick trees pressed in on both sides, like the world was closing its mouth around us. No bars on your phone, no emergency service coverage, just timber, steel, and sweat. It wasn't long before the story started. One of the older guys, Benny, claimed the ravine was bad land. Not cursed exactly, just avoided. He said the locals called it Hollowbone Hollow. When I asked why, he shrugged and said, "That's just what we call places we don't go. Places that never learned how to forget what they buried." At night, the older guys drank and told tales around the fire, people going missing in the mountains, strange shadows between the trees, voices coming over radios long after they'd been shut off. I thought it was just part of the culture, working men passing down scary stories like a campfire tradition. It didn't bother me. Not until the voices started for real. At first, it was just faint chatter on our two-way radios, broken phrases, static, never clear. Then they started repeating things we'd said hours earlier, word for word. At first, we laughed it off. Then we stopped laughing. Because the voices weren't just repeating what we said. They were saying things we hadn't said yet. The radio chatter got worse over the next few days. Sometimes it was just broken syllables. Sometimes it sounded like breathing. But every now and then, it would spit out a full sentence, one that had already been said earlier in the day, by someone on the crew. It was never immediate. It would wait until things went quiet. Then out of nowhere, the radio would crackle and repeat a phrase exactly as it had been spoken down to the intonation. Benny stopped using his radio after the 4th day. He said it gave him headaches. I think he just didn't want to hear his own voice echoed back from the trees. The site itself started to feel different too. Not dangerous, exactly, just wrong. There was this weight in the air, like you were always being observed. At first, I chalked it up to the terrain. The ravine had steep sides that echoed even the smallest noises, so it was easy to feel like someone was nearby when they weren't. But then we started finding things. Near the western tree line, someone discovered a circle of small animal bones, arranged like spokes of a wheel, perfectly symmetrical. Another guy found an old wooden spoon wedged in the bark of a tree 15 feet off the ground. Once I watched a crow follow us for almost an hour, never flying, just hopping from branch to branch, matching our pace like it was trying to listen. Then the floodlights cut out. We'd installed them for night shifts, and they were supposed to auto-switch with the generator. One night, just after midnight, every light on the lower tier of the ridge went black at once. The backup system failed too. I remember walking back to the camper and seeing nothing but the vague outlines of trees against a moonless sky. That was the first night I saw the shape. Not a person, not an animal, just a silhouette. Still as stone, taller than anyone on the crew. Standing just outside the cleared perimeter behind the mist that clung to the tree line. I couldn't make out features, just the impression of eyes. Not glowing, not moving, just fixed on me. I didn't tell anyone. Part of me didn't want it to be real. But then one of the new guys, Kyle, came back from the woods, pale as death. Said he'd heard his supervisor calling him from behind a fallen tree. Only the supervisor had been asleep in the truck the entire time. And when Kyle turned around, no one was there. But the voice, it kept whispering his name for another 30 seconds. The day after Kyle heard the voice, he didn't show up to breakfast. That wasn't like him. He was always the first one up, already sipping black coffee by the fire pit before the rest of us even stumbled out of our bunks. We thought maybe he overslept, so one of the guys knocked on his camper door. No answer. When they went in, his bed was made boots gone, jacket missing, and the door wasn't locked. It was like he just walked out, except none of us had seen or heard anything all night. We searched the site. For hours. Benny and I combed the east ridge while the others fanned out toward the ravine's edge. There were no tracks in the snow, no snapped branches, no signs of a struggle. His gear was untouched. But near the edge of the clearing, someone found something else, a single glove. Kyle's. Propped upright on a tree stump, fingers curled like it had been posed. That night, no one talked much. We sat around the fire in silence, sipping from metal cups, eyes darting toward the trees. The radios were off. No one wanted to hear themselves coming from the forest. And then sometime past midnight, we heard singing. Low, warped voices drifting through the trees, not words, not a language, just sounds. Harmonic, rhythmic, almost like chanting. It came from multiple directions at once. One guy swore he saw someone standing between the floodlights, just beyond the clearing, swaying in time with the tune. By the time anyone looked, it was gone. The next morning, we found a totem. Right in the center of the camp where the fire pit had been was a small wooden carving. Crude but detailed enough that we all recognized it instantly. It was Kyle's face. His cheekbones, the scar above his brow, even the chipped tooth he joked about on his first day. The carving had no eyes, just empty sockets hollowed out too deep. That's when the crew started to fracture. Two of the older guys packed up and left that same day, saying they didn't need the money that badly. One of the younger guys tried to leave too, but his truck wouldn't start. Battery was new, full tank of gas. No reason it shouldn't have turned over. We tried jump-starting it and nothing. Benny muttered something about the ravine not letting people go until it was done. I wanted to laugh, but I couldn't. Later that night, I heard footsteps around my camper. They didn't walk. They paced. Clockwise. For hours. I didn't dare look out the window. But when I finally opened the door at dawn, I found my own socks soaked and frozen, tied together, and nailed to the outer wall of the camper right under the window by my bed. None of us had slept. And we all knew the truth, whether we said it or not. Kyle wasn't missing. He'd been taken. The night after the totem appeared, I didn't sleep at all. Every branch scraping against the camper made my pulse spike. Around 3 a.m., I felt a draft on my neck, cold and deliberate. I sat up, heart hammering. The window above my bunk was cracked open. I know I hadn't left it like that. As As I moved to shut it, I caught sight of something wedged between the screen and the frame. A note handwritten in blocky, uneven letters soaked through with melted frost. It said, "You stayed too long." I woke Benny. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to rationalize it. We both knew. This place wasn't just haunted, it was feeding on us. We told the others, and by sunrise we agreed we were done. We packed what we could and loaded the trucks. The site was falling into a kind of sickness. Tools rusting, overnight machines stalling for no reason, fuel draining faster than it should. And the woods had gone quiet, not peaceful dead. But one of the trucks wouldn't start. Again. Different vehicle, same problem. This one belonged to Jim, the oldest guy left on the crew. He shrugged it off, told us to go on ahead, and that he'd catch a ride once he sorted it out. But something in his tone felt off, almost relieved. We left 2 guys behind to help him, and the rest of us drove up the ridge, praying the road hadn't iced over. 10 minutes in, we lost radio contact. Static again, whispers folded in between white noise. Benny was gripping the wheels so tight his knuckles had gone pale. Then he slammed on the brakes. Up ahead in the snow was a trail of boot prints. Not fresh. Perfect. Like someone had walked backward in a single line all the way down the middle of the road. We didn't see anyone. But from the edge of the woods, we heard it again. That soft, droning hum like 100 voices whispering in harmony. Benny turned the truck around without a word. When we got back to the base of camp, Jim and the others were gone. No sign of them. No tracks. Just their gear piled neatly by the fire pit, and a second wooden totem, this one, with 3 faces' mouths carved open as if screaming. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I knew. We weren't just being hunted, we were being chosen. We left that day and never looked back. I quit logging for good. Benny moved to New Mexico. We don't talk much. What's there to say? The silence between us says enough. Months later, curiosity got the better of me. I filed a records request with a landowner, asked about past incidents at the site. Most were dismissed. But one entry from 1979 stood out. A crew of 6 reported missing, never found. The only thing recovered, a crude map carved into a tree showing the ravine, a spiral, and one phrase beneath it. Some are hired, some are given. And now I dream of that spiral. Every single night. Story 4. The Dolls in the Burned Clearing. Back in the spring of 2021, we moved from the city of Eugene, Oregon, to a quiet logging town nestled near the Cascade Mountains. It was supposed to be a fresh start. After my wife lost her job during the pandemic, and I was offered a forestry position, managing replanting projects, it felt like the right move. We bought a modest house at the end of a gravel road, where the forest began just a few steps beyond our backyard. Our 2 sons, Caleb and Mason, were thrilled. To them, it was one big adventure. They were 11 and 9, wild with energy and full of curiosity. We figured the fresh air and space would do them good. The house itself was older, built in the 70s, but it was sturdy, surrounded by towering pine trees and wild blackberry bushes. Our nearest neighbor was over half a mile away. It was the kind of place where you could hear your own heartbeat at night. During the first few weeks, we spent time clearing debris, fixing the back deck, and exploring the old trails that cut through the woods behind our property. The trails weren't official, more like paths carved out by hunters or hikers over the years. One afternoon, I took the boys out while my wife stayed back to unpack. We followed a narrow path that led down a slope toward a dry creek bed. From there, we found an overgrown trail that twisted deeper into the woods. It was peaceful. That evening around sunset, we sat on the porch watching deer pass through the yard. Caleb asked me if the forest ever burned down. I told him wildfires were rare up here, but not impossible. He nodded, then said something that gave me chills. I saw a part where the ground was all black, like something had burned, but just in a circle. I paused, confused. I asked him where, and he pointed vaguely toward the trail we had taken. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe an old campfire, I told myself. Just some charred earth. Nothing serious. But that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I kept staring out the kitchen window at the tree line. Something about the way Caleb had said it unsettled me, as if he hadn't just seen it, but felt something wrong. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I waited until the boys were at school and my wife was on a video call, then grabbed my boots jacket and a small field knife and followed the same trail Caleb had described. The forest was quiet that morning. Overcast skies cast a pale gray light through the trees, and the only sounds were the occasional flutter of birds and the crunch of my steps on damp needles and moss. The path sloped down, just as I remembered, curving near the old creek bed, then turning left toward a patch of tall ferns. That's when I noticed it. A clearing maybe 30 feet across, where the trees abruptly stopped, and the soil was a deep, unnatural black. It was just like Caleb said, circular, almost perfect in shape. No recent logs, no campfire ring, no tire marks. Just charred earth, cracked and dry, like it had burned years ago. The air smelled faintly of ash, but there were no signs of fresh fire. It was like something had scorched the ground, and then vanished without a trace. As I stepped further into the clearing, I caught sight of something that made me pause. Sitting near the center was a plastic trash bag, partially melted and sun-bleached, surrounded by scattered objects, shards of glass, rusted silverware, what looked like a broken toy truck. And near the edge of the clearing, half buried in the dirt, was a doll. Not a modern one. This doll was old porcelain face, cracked and faded with tangled blonde hair matted to one side. Its eyes were glass, one slightly rolled back in its socket, the other staring right at me. I bent down, brushed away some ash and pine needles, and uncovered two more smaller ones beside it. One had no arms. The other had its mouth painted shut with what looked like dried red wax. My skin prickled. I don't know why, but I suddenly felt exposed, like I was being watched. The forest was silent, heavier than before. I backed out of the clearing slowly, my boots leaving shallow prints in the ashy ground. When I got home, I didn't tell my wife. Not yet. But that night I dreamt of glass eyes and burnt soil, and woke up sweating with the faint scent of something sweet and rotten still hanging in the air. The following days passed uneventfully, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. I didn't go back to the clearing. I focused on work fixing a broken gutter, helping Mason with his math homework, trying to distract my mind from the image of those dolls staring up at me through the dirt. But the forest felt different now. The air outside had a damp, sour quality at night, and the silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt loaded, like the woods were holding their breath. Then one night, around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of the doorbell. Not just once, a series of frantic rings, 5, maybe 6 times fast and desperate, like someone in trouble. My wife shot up beside me, eyes wide. "Who the hell would be out here this late?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I grabbed my flashlight from the nightstand, slid quietly out of bed, and made my way downstairs, heart hammering in my chest. I peeked through the front window. Nothing. Porch empty. No cars. No footprints in the thin layer of misty dew on the steps. Still, I opened the door cautiously, shining the flashlight around the yard. Trees, shadows, nothing more. But just as I was about to close the door, I heard it. A laugh. It was faint, almost musical. A child's giggle, not joyous, but eerie, drawn out like it had been played through a cracked music box. It came from the woods, the direction of the burned clearing. My blood turned cold. I turned the flashlight toward the trees, scanning back and forth. Nothing moved, but the sound had definitely been unreal. When I stepped back inside, my wife stood at the bottom of the stairs, pale. "Did you hear it too?" she asked. I nodded slowly. She didn't press for details. We double-checked the locks, gathered the boys into our room, and slept with the lights on. The next morning, Caleb asked Dad, "Did someone come last night?" I told him no, probably just animals. He gave me a strange look and said, "Because I had a dream." Someone with no face was outside ringing the bell, and they had one of the dolls in their hand. I didn't know what to say, because the laugh I heard, it matched exactly the one from his old baby monitor years ago. I tried to brush it all off: the dolls, the doorbell, the laughter, but something in me couldn't let it go. Maybe it was Caleb's dream. Maybe it was that feeling I couldn't shake, that something out there wasn't done with us. A few days later, I decided to go back to the clearing, but not alone this time. I told Tom, one of the senior rangers at the forestry office, about the strange burn pattern and the old trash I'd found. I left out the part about the dolls and the dream, just enough to pique his curiosity. We drove out in his truck and hiked in from a maintenance access point that led behind my neighborhood. It was cloudy again, gray and still. When we reached the clearing, Tom slowed to a stop, his eyes narrowing. The soil was still blackened, but something had changed. Where before the ground was bare now, there were dozens of sticks planted upright in the dirt like crude markers. Tied to the top of each one was fabric, old rotted bits of ribbon. I walked closer and realized that some weren't just sticks, they were bones. Tiny, delicate. Animal bones, maybe, but not all of them. Near the center, I spotted the same trash bag I'd seen before, but now it had been torn open completely. Dolls more than before were scattered around it. Some were melted, others missing limbs, a few painted with crude symbols in black ink or ash. One doll had its eyes gouged out and replaced with small buttons stitched into place with twine. Tom crouched and picked up a piece of burned wood. His face tightened. "Looks like someone's been doing rituals out here. This isn't just garbage." Then he pointed toward the edge of the clearing. There, nailed into a low-hanging tree branch, was a child's shoe, faded pink, torn at the sole. We stood in silence, the woods heavier than I remembered. Tom finally said, "I'll file a report. But if I were you, I'd keep the kids away from here." We left quickly, but as we turned back toward the trail, I heard a sound behind us. A soft click like a camera shutter. I spun around, nothing. No breeze, no birds, just the burnt clearing and the dolls watching in silence. We made the decision to move 2 weeks later. My wife didn't argue when I brought it up. She had started waking in the night, saying she heard something walking around outside, slow, deliberate steps circling the house. Caleb and Mason had grown quiet too, like the air in the house was pressing down on them. I didn't need more proof. Whatever was out there had followed us back from that place, and I wasn't about to wait for it to come knocking again. We found a place 45 minutes away in an older, settled town. While packing up, I tried to keep everything normal. For the boys, told them we just needed to be closer to Mom's new job somewhere with better schools. But the truth still lingered like a cold draft. It happened the night before the move. We'd spent the whole day loading boxes, taping up kitchen drawers, cleaning out the shed. Around 11 p.m., I took a last walk through the house. I passed the boys' room, the hallway still lit with a soft night light, then stepped out onto the front porch to breathe. That's when I saw it. A package. Small, rectangular, wrapped in brown paper, no address, no tape. Just sitting on the top step like someone had gently placed it there minutes earlier. I looked around, no movement, no car lights, nothing but the trees swaying in the breeze. My hands trembled as I picked it up and brought it inside. My wife was at the kitchen table taping the last box. I didn't say a word. I just set the package down and slowly peeled back the paper. Inside was a dusty wooden box, maybe the size of a shoebox. I opened it. Inside were clumps of coarse dark hair and a single glass eye. Underneath that, folded carefully, was a photograph, grainy, black and white. It showed a child standing in the burned clearing, smiling, surrounded by dolls. But what chilled me to the bone was the second figure behind them, blurry and tall, holding something in its hand. A camera. We moved the next morning. I never went back, and I never told the boys. But I kept the photo, because sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still wonder who took that picture. And more importantly, were they finished? Story 5. Lights over Dead Horse Canyon. Back in the summer of 2019, I was 17 and living on the edge of the Navajo Reservation in northern Arizona. My cousin Eli and I were always looking for odd jobs, moving hay bales, fixing fences, herding livestock, anything to put gas in the truck and money in our pockets. That July, a rancher named Delano, who lived about 10 miles out past the canyon rim, offered us a quick-paying gig. He needed 2 reliable kids to help drive a herd of cattle through a back trail late at night to avoid attention. It wasn't exactly legal, but in that part of the desert, no one asked many questions. He promised a full day's wage for just a few hours of work. I remember Eli grinning when he heard the offer. "Easy money," he said. We met Delano and 3 other men just after sunset, where the dirt road met the dry gulch known as Dead Horse Canyon, a place our grandparents warned us about as kids. They said the name wasn't just for show. The cattle were already restless, mooing in low, anxious tones, their heads jerking in strange directions, like they sensed something we couldn't. The night air was heavy with heat, and the desert was still like it had stopped breathing. We mounted up on old horses, each of us handed a flashlight, but told firmly not to use it unless absolutely necessary. "Too easy to be seen," Delano warned, his voice low. "Let the moon guide you, and don't stray off the path." The moon was nearly full, casting a silvery light over the canyon walls and the dry brush below. We began the slow descent into the canyon hooves, crunching on gravel shadows, stretching long and thin around us. Eli rode beside me, quiet for once, scanning the cliffs above. I remember glancing back at the cattle, normally noisy, but now eerily silent, like they were holding their breath too. And that was the first moment I noticed it. A star, not one already in the sky, but one that blinked on suddenly just above the canyon ridge. Bright, sharp, and unmoving. Then another, and another. Like someone was flipping switches in the sky. Eli leaned over and muttered, "Those stars weren't there before." He was right. And something about the way they appeared made my stomach twist. We kept moving the trail, winding deeper into the canyon, the cattle trudging along behind us, their hooves kicking up little clouds of dust that shimmered under the pale moonlight. But my eyes kept drifting upward. The stars, if that's what they even were still there, scattered in odd clusters above the ridgeline. They didn't twinkle like normal stars. They glowed solid, steady, like tiny holes punched into the sky. Every few minutes, one would blink out and another would flicker on somewhere else. Eli noticed it too. He stopped his horse and pointed. They're moving, but not like planes. I nodded. Whatever they weren't satellites either. I'd seen enough of those slow gliders to know the difference. These things popped into existence, held still, then vanished without warning. You think it's the military, I asked, though? I didn't believe it. Eli shook his head slowly. I don't think they fly lights like that where people can see them. We pressed on our nerves, coiling tighter with each mile. The cattle started acting strange, some slowing down, others veering off the trail and having to be pushed back in a line. One steer froze completely, eyes wide and legs trembling. Delano rode up, smacked it hard with a stick, and growled, "Keep 'em moving. Don't stop. No matter what." Something about the way he said it made the hair on my neck stand up. That's when we heard the sound. Not loud, not sudden. It rolled out from the cliffs above, this low hum like 1,000 bees trapped inside a steel drum. It vibrated in my chest, subtle but wrong, like the air itself was humming. My horse shivered underneath me, snorting nervously. "Don't look at the lights," one of the men called back. His voice cracked. "Eyes on the trail." But of course I looked. One of the lights blinked brighter just for a second, enough to make me squint. And in that flash, I saw something silhouetted on the ridge, tall, thin, and wrong. It stood too still. Then just like that, the light vanished. And so did the figure. Eli cursed under his breath. What the hell is going on out here? I didn't have an answer. But the deeper we went, the more I knew we weren't just moving cattle anymore. Something else was moving with us. The trail narrowed as we descended farther, the canyon walls rising taller on both sides, like jaws slowly closing in. The air turned colder, heavy with silence, broken only by the occasional shuffle of hooves and the creak of leather saddles. Eli was fidgeting more now, glancing over his shoulder every few minutes. I could feel it too. Something was behind us, just out of sight, matching our pace. Then it came. A deep echo, sudden and sharp, like the aftermath of a gunshot, but without the actual shot. It reverberated through the canyon like thunder, bouncing off stone, low and drawn out, vibrating through our bones. My horse reared slightly, and I tightened the reins, heart pounding. "What was that?" I whispered. Eli didn't answer. His face had gone pale. We all came to a slow halt. Even the cattle stopped, ears twitching, snorting nervously. One of the men, the oldest one, spit on the ground and muttered, "No echo without a bang, unless something's calling." Another echo rolled through the canyon, louder this time. Still no source, no flash of light, no crack of a rifle. Just that deep, unnatural rumble hanging in the air, like a warning. Delano barked, "Move, keep moving." But now the cattle were in a panic. A few turned completely and tried to scramble uphill. Another stumbled and fell, lowing loudly. That hum from earlier was back too, rising under the echoes, like a pressure building in the air. I turned to Eli, but he was staring up again. "One of the lights is gone," he said. "It didn't blink out, it fell." "But I swear to God," he muttered, "it dropped. Straight down like it was coming for something." I looked up just in time to see another one vanish, not fade, drop like a marble falling through water. Then the third echo hit, longest and loudest. And suddenly the herd broke. Cattle bolted in every direction, dust, flying hooves, pounding like thunder. Eli's horse bucked and spun, and I lost sight of him as he vanished into the chaos. I tried shouting his name, but the echo swallowed my voice. And that was when I realized something wasn't just watching us. It was hurting us, I kicked my heels into the horse and charged after Eli, barely able to see through the clouds of dust rising from the stampede. Shouts echoed behind me, but they were swallowed by the canyon lost under the pounding hooves and that strange, mechanical hum still pressing in from all sides. The cattle were gone, scattered into the night, and the men were nowhere in sight. It was just me now, riding blind through darkness and chaos. I spotted Eli's silhouette up ahead, his horse struggling to keep balance on the uneven ground. "Eli," I shouted, and he turned just enough for me to see the sheer panic on his face. He was pointing behind me, eyes wide. I turned and saw it. A sphere of blue light hovering maybe 30 feet off the ground, pulsing softly. It wasn't like a flashlight or a drone. It had no source, no beam. Just a floating orb that shimmered and swirled like liquid glass, following us at a steady, chilling pace. Beneath it, the air distorted like heat waves rising off pavement. But it was cold. I felt it even through my jacket. Bone-deep cold that made my teeth ache. "Go," I yelled, pulling alongside Eli. "Don't stop." We pushed the horses harder, charging up a narrow side trail that led out of the canyon. The light followed, silent, smooth, relentless. Every few seconds it would flicker and appear closer, like it wasn't flying so much as skipping forward in bursts. Then just when I thought we might lose it, the trail forked. I veered left. Eli veered right. That was the last time I saw him. I heard his horse scream an awful high-pitched cry that twisted my gut, and then silence. No crashing, no footsteps. Just the sound of wind and that hum fading into nothing. I stopped at the ridge, turned around, and called his name over and over. No response. Only the blinking lights above still watching. I waited a full hour before I had the nerve to ride back down, but when I reached the fork, there was nothing. No Eli, no horse. Just a single boot lying in the dust. And overhead, one of the lights blinked out like a candle snuffed in the wind. I never found Eli. The search party combed the canyon for days, dogs, rangers, even helicopters, but there was no trace. Not a body, not a broken saddle, not a blood stain. Just his boot sitting there like someone had placed it carefully in the dirt. Delano and the others refused to talk. They gave statements, sure, but their eyes were hollow. Whatever they saw that night, they weren't going to admit it out loud. Not to the cops, and definitely not to me. A week later, I visited my grandmother's sister, old Aunt Nita, who lived in a weathered trailer near the canyon's edge. She was in her 80s, blind in one eye, but sharper than anyone I knew. When I told her where we'd been, she went quiet, her hands pausing mid-stir over a pot of cornmeal. "Dead Horse Canyon," she said softly, almost like she was tasting the name. "That place has always been bad." I asked her what she meant. She sighed, sat down slowly, and tapped the wooden table with her knuckles. Long ago, before the land had fences, there were stories. People disappearing. Herds gone in the night. Lights that danced in the sky, calling out in voices that sounded like your own. My grandfather saw them once. Said the lights weren't stars. Said they were watchers. "Watchers?" I asked. She nodded. "Things that don't belong here. They show up when people take too much from the land, or when someone's spirit is cracked open like a wound that lets them in. You boys were on a path that never should have been opened again." I told her about Eli, the lights, the cold, the hum, the echo with no shot. She closed her eyes and whispered something in Diné I didn't recognize. Then she said, "If it wanted him, nothing could have stopped it. But you didn't look back, did you?" I shook my head. "Good," she said. "Looking back means you accept the invitation. I never rode near that canyon again. And every now and then, When the night's clear and too still, I look up and see a single star flicker on out of nowhere. It doesn't twinkle, it waits. Story 6. It knew our names in Alaska. It was early October in southern Alaska, just outside of Juneau, when I decided to take my little sister and her best friend on one last hike before the heavy snow hit. The days were already getting shorter, and with the sky darkening earlier, it felt like the perfect time for a cold weather adventure. I was 19 then, and my sister Ava had just turned 14. Her friend Marcy was the quiet type, polite, and always tagging along. We had done this trail before, an old logging route that wound through dense spruce forest and climbed toward an abandoned fire lookout tower. It wasn't official or maintained, but it had enough boot prints and broken branches to follow if you knew what to look for. I packed light 2 headlamps, an old hunting knife, a thermal blanket, and enough water and snacks for a few hours. Ava brought her dad jokes and a whistle she never used, except to annoy me. Marcy was in charge of the flashlight. The air was crisp as we set out, the kind that stings just enough to remind you you're alive. The trail was silent, but beautiful. Moss hung from the trees like tired curtains, and the sky above the canopy was streaked with pale orange from the last bits of sun. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt, how untouched. We joked, told stories, and took turns pointing out animal tracks, moose, maybe fox. I never mentioned the faint human-like prints I saw off to the side. Too big to be any of ours. About a mile in, the trees grew denser. The sounds of the highway and the town below had faded, swallowed by bark and fog. We reached the ridge where the old tower's remains were supposed to be, but something felt off. The trees weren't just close together, they felt like they were leaning inward as if guarding something. Then Marcy froze. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. We all went silent. No birds, no wind. That's when I heard it too. A voice. Faint. Male. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't even loud. It was calling. Not for help. For me. It said my full name. First and last. And it came from the woods up ahead where no one should have been. I tried to play it off at first. Maybe someone else was hiking nearby. Maybe I misheard the wind. But then it said it again, my full name clear this time, but still hushed like someone whispering just behind the trees. Ava clutched my arm. Marcy stepped closer, flashlight shaking in her hand. We hadn't passed anyone on the trail, and we were at least 3 miles from the closest road. There shouldn't have been another soul out here. "Who's there?" I called, trying to sound calm. Silence. Then from the left, deeper in the woods, Ava's voice. High-pitched, worried. "Hey, wait up," it cried. Only Ava was standing next to me, holding her breath. Her eyes widened. That sounded like me. I scanned the trees. No movement, no crunch of leaves, just thick forest and growing fog. I gripped the knife in my pocket without pulling it out. I wasn't sure what we were dealing with, but my gut told me we needed to go. I nudged the girls and whispered back to the trail. Slowly. We started moving, careful not to make noise. But the forest didn't return to normal. It was too quiet, like it was listening, watching. A few steps later, Marcy let out a gasp. From somewhere behind us, my voice echoed, panicked, breathless. "Run, go now." But I hadn't spoken. That broke whatever courage we had left. I turned and shouted, "Move," and we bolted, crashing through low branches and damp leaves. The trail blurred beneath our feet as we ran, flashlight beams dancing wildly. My lungs burned from the cold, but I didn't dare stop. Then just as we rounded a bend, Ava screamed. I spun around. She had dropped to her knees, eyes locked on something behind me. I turned and caught the briefest glimpse of a figure thin, its face pale, smooth, and wrong. It ducked behind a tree like it had been caught spying. But the worst part wasn't its shape. It was the voice that followed. A perfect copy of my mother's, soft and sweet. "Come home, baby. It's safe now." And it was coming from everywhere. We didn't stop to think. We just ran. The forest blurred around us, shadows twisting in our peripheral vision as the thing's voice echoed behind us. My mother's tone, Ava's laughter, even my own voice screaming for help. It was all wrong. Too perfect. Too clean. Like a recording played through something that didn't understand emotion. It wasn't trying to sound human. It was trying to remember how to sound human. Branches slapped my face as I pushed ahead, trying to keep the girls in front of me. I shouted directions, left, then down, then straight. But the trail was almost gone now, swallowed by moss and fog. The trees were growing closer together, denser than I remembered, and every time I blinked, I felt like they had moved just slightly inward. We reached a small clearing, nothing but damp ground and a moss-covered stump. Ava was gasping for breath, Marcy pale and silent. I turned to scan the trees behind us, and then I saw it. Just standing there. Not charging, not hiding, just watching. It was tall, too tall and thin in an unnatural way, like the proportions had been guessed by something that had never seen a real human. Its skin was bone-white smooth like wax, and it wore clothing that didn't make sense, mismatched, outdated. I realized with a sick twist in my stomach that it was wearing a shirt identical to mine. Same gray flannel, same tear on the left sleeve. It even had the same old hiking boots. Its head tilted slightly, as if curious. And then it opened its mouth, but no sound came out. Just a twitch, like it was trying to decide which voice to use next. Then, without warning, it took one slow step forward. That broke me. I grabbed Ava and Marcy and hissed, "Go now." We took off again, crashing through the undergrowth, barely keeping our footing. My mind raced, heart pounding so loud, I couldn't hear the forest anymore. I didn't know what it was, where it came from, or why it looked like me. But one thing was clear. It didn't want to chase us. It wanted to replace us. We ran until our legs felt like jelly, crashing through branches, stumbling over roots, soaked in cold sweat and blind fear. I wasn't even sure if we were still on the trail. The fog had thickened, swallowing the trees, and every time I thought we'd put distance between us and that thing, I'd hear a snap behind us, a step deliberate and close. I didn't dare look back. Just as my lungs began to give out, I saw it, a faint glow cutting through the mist. Yellow, steady, warm. At first, I thought it was a hallucination, some desperate part of my brain imagining safety. But it grew brighter as we approached, and finally we stumbled into a clearing where an old wooden farmhouse stood. The porch light was on. The place looked abandoned, weather-beaten siding, cracked windows, no car out front, but the light. The light was real. And right now, that was enough. I practically dragged Ava and Marcy up the porch steps, heart thudding in my ears. I reached for the doorknob, half expecting it to be locked, but it turned easily. The door creaked open, and we stepped inside. It smelled like dust and damp wood. The floor groaned beneath us. But the lights inside were working dim, flickering but on. We stood there for a moment, trying to catch our breath, when suddenly an old radio on a table crackled to life. At first, it was just static. Then came a voice. Not just any voice. It was our mom's. Word for word, tone for tone. "You kids better behave, or Daddy's going to turn this truck around." It was a phrase she used all the time when we were little. Something she hadn't said in years. Ava's face drained of color. How would it know that Marcy backed toward the window, trembling? We're not alone in here. That's when I saw it written in the dust across the far wall like it had been traced with a finger. Welcome home, and beneath it, 3 names. Mine, Ava's, Marcy's. We hadn't said Marcy's name once since entering the woods. But something out there had already learned it. I grabbed the radio and yanked the cord from the wall. The voice cut off instantly, leaving behind an eerie silence that pressed in from all sides. None of us spoke. I could hear Ava breathing fast, Marcy whispering something under her breath like a prayer. We stood frozen, waiting to see if anything else would move, or speak, or reach out from the shadow. But the house was still. For now, I pulled the girls to the corner of the room and barricaded the front door with an old bookshelf. We sat there in the dim light backs, pressed to the wall, too afraid to turn off the lamp, too afraid to fall asleep. I kept one hand on the knife, the other on Ava's shoulder, like I could protect her just by holding on. An hour passed, maybe 2. And then we saw headlights. Real ones. They cut through the trees and lit up the clearing, followed by the familiar crunch of tires on gravel. I bolted to the window. It was my dad's truck. I didn't waste a second. I grabbed the girls, flung the door open, and ran toward the vehicle like it was the last lifeboat off a sinking ship. Dad barely had time to open the door before we piled in. He looked at us like we were ghosts. "What the hell happened to you?" I didn't answer. I just said, "Drive. Now." We didn't speak until we were halfway back to town. Even then, I left most of it out. I just said we got lost and panicked. He bought it, or at least pretended to. But before we went to bed that night, I asked Ava to check her backpack. She frowned, unzipped it, and went pale. Inside, wrapped in a scarf neither of us recognized, was a small Polaroid photo. It showed the 3 of us standing in the forest from behind, taken from a distance. But the worst part, we were wearing the same clothes as that day. Except in the picture, there was a 4th figure standing just behind me. Tall, pale, smiling. We burned the photo that night. But sometimes I wake up thinking not everything followed us out of those woods. Something was already inside. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.